another episode of Access Granted. I'm absolutely delighted to have my next guest on the sofa. I would usually do the intro of the guest, but I feel like I'm going to not do it justice. So I'm going to say, well, his name's Roberto. I'm not going to say his surname because I'm going to let him do that. But Roberto is the CEO of Croma Security. Roberto, would you like to introduce yourself for the guest? Because I think it's going to be a lot more sexy if you do it than me.
I don't know about that, but thank you very much. So my name is, in Italian, Roberto Fiorentino. And yes, you're quite right, the CEO of Croma Security Solutions Group PLC. Thank you, Josh, and thank you for inviting me today.
Well, no, thanks for making the effort. I think it's really important that we actually just bring this up with the audience, that actually this morning you've had some root canal treatment. You know, yesterday you messaged me and said, Josh, I might struggle to be there. And I said, look, no worries, but you've made the effort to be here after you've been to the dentist this morning. So
yeah, it's not so much the effort. It's really not a problem. It's just half my face is numb. And yeah, that's it. But we're here now, so we'll get on with it.
Yeah, great. We get that. I'm sure it's going to be great. Right. So, well, talk to me about. Let's start with Croma. Talk to me about Croma.
Okay.
What the business, what it does.
So, do you want Croma today or Croma at its infancy?
I want to do Croma today, and then we're going to go back and do the infancy.
So, Croma today is a complete security solutions provider. We have just over 1,000 staff, and most of those are security officers. There's an ex-military ethos that runs through the veins of the whole company. Our chairman is the ex-commander of Special Airborne, and we have a number of soldiers, ex-Black Watch, that operate in the management levels of the business, and often will employ ex-soldiers as well as security officers. Those security officers tend to do high-end protection. So that will be offices, high-end offices in London. So most of Berkeley Square and the surrounding areas are areas that we cover. Now that's just one arm of the business, which is the manpower, and security is a very broad spectrum subject. So we do locks, we do safes, we do keys, we do alarms, we do CCTV, we do fire, we do intercom systems, and external perimeter detection. Of course, there's lots of other services, some that we don't advertise, but in the world of security, sometimes information is required, and we get involved in some interesting projects. So that is Croma today.
No, I love it. Well, 1,000 people, and it sounds like, it's obviously a very diverse business, and sounds super interesting as well.
Security has always been an interesting subject, for me anyway, but that's probably because I'm an anorak. For most people, it's probably quite boring, and I notice that very few people, even those in our industry, have a general lack of understanding of the concept of security and what it's all about. And an easy analogy I often use with clients is that I will receive a phone call and somebody will say, we've been told that we should speak to you. Someone's given them a recommendation, and we'd like some CCTV, please, in our property or business. And I will usually say why, and they'll say, well, we've just said we need some security. So I'll ask them why again, and sometimes the penny drops then, and sometimes I have to ask even further. And they will eventually come out with a story such as my wife's great aunts passed away in London and left £1 million of jewellery to my wife. So I'll then say, shall we start with a safe then? And then the penny does drop, because CCTV is one of the tools in the world of security, and security is about how we bring together all of the individual items, from locks to safes to alarm systems to surveillance, early detection systems, and then there's even some human training, because if people don't know what they're supposed to do in a hostile event or a difficult situation, you don't get very good results. And the world has been changing over the last decade, and if anyone wants to study the statistics on crime, what they will learn is the significant increase in robbery as opposed to burglary. Now, for your listeners and viewers, I think we should qualify and what I mean by that. So for those that aren't clear on it, a burglary is what happens when you're on holiday, your house gets burgled. A robbery is what happens when you're home and you get robbed at knife point, at gunpoint. And often we're seeing early evening robberies, and we're seeing people accosted as they're getting out of their cars in their drive. And there's a very logical reason why all this is happening. It's because most people have got an alarm, they've got a safe, they've got locks these days, and even with professionals such as us, if you're ever locked out of a property or a safe, we'll get you back in, no problem. But it takes time and it takes skill and effort to get through them. So a lot of burglars have turned to robbery because it's a lot faster to get a result, because you grab someone in their driveway, they're holding their house key, you get them to turn their own alarm off, and you get them to take you to their safe, which they open and hand over the jewellery. Now, if you had to do that while they were on holiday in the south of France, it might take you hours, and all the time you run the risk of someone turning up and getting caught. So in 5 minutes, a robbery can take place, and that's why we're seeing that shift. So Croma, in answer to the question right at the end, does all of those services, including sometimes training householders, residents and staff of those residents on certain security awareness, we'll call it.
Okay, I'll get where you're going with that. So what does it take me to the origins then of Croma?
So Croma started in the 50s with my grandfather and my father in North Africa, and they were the chub agents and the locks and keys, because this is before electronics. And they looked after the American Air Force Base and people like Mobil Oil and other oil companies on the north coast of Africa. Of course, in 1969, there was the revolution with Colonel Gaddafi, and my parents, well, they froze all the bank accounts, seized all the properties, and all of our families were sent off to restart somewhere else. So my uncle Franco went to Chicago because his wife was from Chicago. My father came to Southampton because his wife, my mother, was from Southampton. My uncle Stefano went to northern Italy, to Modena, Ferrari World. And my two aunties went to just south of Rome with my grandparents to a new town called Latina, which is about 50 miles south of Rome. And a lot of people came back from North Africa and settled there. So that's where the business started. When we arrived in the UK, my father restarted in February 1970 the locksmithing business, and I spent my childhood years learning to pick locks and open safes with my father in the school holidays. And there was nothing else to do. We were quite poor. And
did you get good at it?
Yeah, I got good at it. And I sort of knew my way round. The irony to all of this is that my English grandfather was a quite notorious pilot in the Second World War and post Second World War. So my, I suppose, aim was to become a fighter pilot. And I was away at boarding school in England when, at the age of 15, that's how long it took for someone to discover I was red and green colourblind. And that was the end of me joining the Air Force to fly fighter jets. That was really what I wanted to do. My fallback was electronics. I loved gadgets. We were just starting to get into understanding music systems and all of the electronic gadgets that we now take for granted today. But back at 1980, of course, we still didn't even have mobile phones at that point. So I went off and studied electronics and joined a computer company for about 8 months. Really enjoyed it, making electronic circuits, then inspecting them. My mother fell ill, sadly, and she died very young. She was 45, and I was quite 22, I think, at the time, or 23. But while she was ill, my father said, I've got to leave the business, and you know your way round, so you need to throw the towel in at your job, and you need to come here. And help run the family business, which I did, and I'm still there today. So there you go, a long journey. But in that time,
your father had to leave at that point to
look after my mother,
right, okay.
And he did rejoin the business later. But by that time, I'd formed a new business within the business, which was alarms, CCTV, access control, which were the things I was interested in.
And how did you feel about him talking to you about coming into the business at that point? Was that something you were looking forward to doing, or?
I think coming from a Sicilian family, one would say it was a duty. And there wasn't really an option.
It wasn't a conversation.
Or a conversation. And don't get me wrong, I did it willingly. Why wouldn't you? My father, a great man, and when you need something doing at a time like that, then you go along and you do what you need to do, and that's exactly what happened.
Nice. So you came in and then you really focused on setting up that new department in terms of the alarm stuff off the back of the experience that you'd been learning.
Yes, in electronics. And we didn't really look back from there. The business, we ran two businesses, the lock business and the electronic business, and that carried on through till the millennium. And we started, obviously, in 1991. There was, for those of you that are too young, you won't remember, that was a recession year, 91. And it was such a crash that it was almost a sledgehammer that came out. I had some very large orders with a Scandinavian company to provide security, and we're talking very, very large contracts at Heathrow Airport and on a couple of their hotels. I'd already secured their buildings in Southampton and their College Hill site in London, and the directors wanted me to take over and do more security work on all of their portfolio. And as the crunch came, all of those orders just disappeared and dried up, and I had a whole team, including construction guys, because we weren't just now doing security, we were applying for planning to change the A4 into Heathrow Road so that we could have a slip road, to have traffic queuing to now car park barriers, which people didn't have in those days, and CCTV to monitor the car parks. And we'd already spent a fortune getting the projects moving to then find out they weren't going to proceed. So that was in 91. What happened in that recession is that there was a crime rise, and domestic clients suddenly appeared saying we want alarms in our homes, and that was really when the boom came through to 95 and probably through to 2000. Was very busy with domestic clients.
How big was the business in 91 then, before you saw this increase in demand on those?
In terms of the business, probably no more than 30 people, maybe 40 people max.
Okay.
And we then, it must have been a bit more than that. Sorry, we cut back to that because we had quite a number of individuals working on the bigger project stuff, project managing. Then we got into the millennium. Of course, everyone recalls 9/11. That was a huge boost to the world of security. I was then getting involved in doing penetration testing on some high-risk sites, which means finding out how we're going to break in.
Okay.
And then what are we going to do to stop it happening?
Yeah, I did think about this at the weekend. I was traveling to Norway, and I was just thinking about the airport. I was like, you go through security and stuff like that, and obviously
Yes.
they do. I was like, they must have a process where they just test this security often, like people trying to figure out how to. I ended up leaving a bottle of water accidentally in my bag.
In your bag, and they picked it
they
up.
obviously picked it up, and I'm like, oh, glad they did. And I thought some people, they must just have people that try and test this stuff all the time. Would that be true or not?
It's true in certain environments. Surprisingly, not enough testing is done, because I'm a great believer that if you want to be successful, you have to train, and there is not enough training done. I've carried out a fair bit of it on certain sites, but only after pushing the clients to say this needs to be done. And I carried out penetration testing on one of the top 10 national infrastructure sites in the UK. The report that I was able to write at the end of it was astonishing, because it allowed their organisation to completely change their policies on a number of points where they fell down, and they would not have come to light had the testing not been done.
No,
So it's a bit like people put an alarm in, and they've ticked the box. But if you're not testing it every day to make sure it's performing, the day that you get attacked is the day it lets you down.
I might be jumping ahead here, but is there any stories or anecdotes from your career where you're like, actually, you've done a particular like testing, or like there's been a security issue, or where you've been like that you can share with us? Really sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, I think I can talk about one without naming the site, but I was doing a test where I was breaking in at around 2-3 in the morning, and at that particular time, the fleet was in Portsmouth, and the Queen was there for Trafalgar some years ago. So everyone and their dog was on the south coast, and I was doing testing on a site which they should have notified them it was a test, and the notification wasn't sent through. So I jumped over an electric fence and landed on the ground, knowing that my system, because I was testing my own system for integrity, knowing that it was going to have locked onto me. The camera locked onto me, went onto the priority screen. Unfortunately, the controller at the time, for whatever reason, called it in as armed and dangerous, and it resulted in multiple armed response units hitting the site in a matter of 3 minutes, with dogs running around with guns. Luckily, I was already inside the building. I'd got across quite 150 metres of ground and zigzagged past everything. Some graveyard shift officers came running out on open comms on their radios, saying, "Which way did you go? I don't know. I'm ducked down somewhere." But I
sounds very James Bond-esque.
It's exciting and it's fun. There's no doubt about it. It's a bit of an adrenaline rush. However, there was a serious side to it. I remember getting home at about 4 a.m, having managed to convince the authorities that it was a real test. Bear in mind, I'm all in black and I've got no credentials with me. But eventually I get home, and I think my wife said, she muttered under her sleepy head, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "I told you I was going back to do another test," because I'd done one the previous night, and I said I was doing another one. And she just said, before she fell asleep, "You want to be careful, you'll get shot one of these days," and fell asleep. Of course, the following morning, I had the head of anti-terrorism on the phone saying, "Roberto, you were very close to getting shot last night. It was called through as a live event. We did not know this was a test, and we weren't going to be asking questions, bearing in mind you've just jumped over a fence and were looking particularly dangerous." So yes. Anyway, I'm still here.
That one is going to stick out in the mind. Well, luckily for us, and luckily for you.
But I think that kind of testing needs to be done. And what that testing did, it allowed me to write a report for that organisation that showed them all the things that were wrong. If you're attacking a very important site like that, sending officers unarmed, because it's an unarmed site in this case, out with badges round their neck that have full access rights. Had that been a real hostile event, they would have been shot, and they're carrying with them the key to open every door to go right into the heart of the building. So, of course, the learning from that operation was, if there is a hostile event, you're not running out the doors to go and see who it is and ask them how they are.
No.
You're going to stay inside while you call for backup. Such a basic rule, thing to think about.
Yeah, but had you not really tested it?
If you'd not tested it, how would you know what those officers were going to do? And they were third-party officers employed by the client, and that company were following what they thought they should do. Actually, everything had to be rewritten in the way that they operate to change those protocols. You can't just come running out the door. The first attempt to get in was really, really simple. Coming out to have a cigarette, and they're also wearing their badges. So new protocol, you've got to be let in and out.
Yeah.
Because if someone seizes it from you, having breached the perimeter, you're into the heart of an operation, and no good at all. Anyway, enough of them.
Enough of them. Moving back onto the business timeline then. So
right.
1995, the business is growing off the back.
2000, we went on to, we had then we went into 9/11, and as a result of 9/11, a number of important sites around the UK required securing. One of them in the world of shipping, so the port authorities, and we got involved in doing some work to make sure we could quayside, landside secure these sites. And we also did some testing for the cruise lines, which is interesting because they have a business that requires them to get 2,000-3,000 passengers off almost every day in a different port in another part of the world, and then get them back on. And those that go to stop in Barcelona on their way down to the Med, when they're heading up Las Ramblas, at least 10 of the passengers will be mugged or have their wallets taken from their pockets or their handbags, and in there will be their cruise card, and they're returning back to the ship, and they're having to be verified before they can be let back on board. But we talked to them about some interesting changes, and one of the first things was we told them that they needed to have photographs of people jump on their screen when their card is presented so they can do a visual verification rather than someone just getting on with a card, because if someone seized your card and the card gives the green light, it doesn't guarantee that it belongs to you.
Yeah, agreed.
So so that went on in the 2000s, in the first decade of after the millennium. And in 2012, I was no, 2010, I suppose, and just slightly before, I was thinking of slowing down and retiring and stopping work. But I wasn't really ready for it, and an opportunity reared its head. I was contacted by the brother of the Duke of Northumberland, lovely chap, James Percy, and he said, "We've got a guarding company, and we hear you've got the best gadgets and toys in the world of security, and we think we should all be together." And I decided that we would work as partners. I didn't really want to sell the business. And within a year, we all got on well, and we said, "Well, I'll sell them my business. We'll do the deal." Now, they were on the stock exchange. They were an AIM-listed company. So we started the process, and there are rules and regulations in AIM-listing companies. And I didn't know this at the time, but they'd come along to buy us, and one of the rules says that the acquirer must, of course, be making more profit than the company it's buying. And because it wasn't, it became what's known as a reverse takeover. Okay. So whilst they bought us, we kind of did a reverse takeover of them. And then we became, from CSS, we still remained as CSS, but Croma Security Solutions, because they were Croma and we were County Security System, CSS. So we just joined, the letters remained the same. From then, I started learning a whole new world of business and politics, which have little to do with security, which is my main subject and area of expertise. But I'm now used to all of that, and now we're looking to actively grow this business through acquisitions across the country, and we're building security centres. And the latest one we built is in Winchester High Street. Okay. And you can go in there and get keys cut, but while you're standing there, you're looking at nice show boards of alarms and CCTV, access control, intercom systems, and you can come and have a chat about security generally. Now we have 10 of those open now, and we're going to keep opening those in high streets. I'm still an old-fashioned believer that whilst everyone's running from the high street, or telling us they're running from the high street, that if you want to go and buy security, you want to go and see someone. Are you really going to buy security on the internet? Some people buy gadgets on the internet, but if you've got a serious security problem, are you going to tell someone you don't know on the internet that I've got £1 million of jewellery, I've got £500,000 of cars in the garage, and I live in a £5 million house? What do you recommend I have? The answer is, if you can't see them, are you really going to divulge all that information? And even in our job roles, when we are absolutely introduced to clients, we have to persuade them to make sure they tell us everything, because that is what is going to define their risk, and that is how we're going to know what we're going to do to fix them. Otherwise, it's like going to the doctor and only giving them 2 of the symptoms and missing the third. That you're going to get misdiagnosed.
Absolutely. Someone's got like $500,000,
that they don't want to tell you about.
Yeah. But you're going to really need to know about to make sure you've got the right security in place.
Absolutely. There are obviously there are generalizations in the world of security, such as the types of alarms, but they're all in varying quantities depending on what the risk is. And if a client is at a certain level, there may be a little bit more training and conversation that's required. It's not just let's send a salesman in. We send a consultant in, and sometimes me, to meet the client and understand the environment. And if it is a high-level client, one of the things that is so simple that everyone forgets about, you've got electric gates on most of our clients' properties, and when they drive in, they open the gates and they just drive in and go and park. Well, there's someone behind you. So we have to train them to drive in and stop and let the gates close before you carry on. And if there is anything strange going on, don't get out your car. You're actually safer in your car than trying to get out of it. Yes, the glass can get smashed, but you're in a vehicle that can move. Yeah. So we've had a very serious attack on a client in Southampton, where the client was known to the attackers, and the client was known to be carrying something or some things of high value, resulted in a throat being cut, but they survived, and the husband being knocked out unconscious in an attack, these men with balaclavas, just to get these valuables. And it happened in the driveway, and it was just driven in through the gates. They actually had already jumped the perimeter fence and were waiting for them, and grabbed them as they got out of their car to head to the front door. So situational awareness and knowing where you are. we kind of understand it to a certain level. I mean, if I was to ask you to walk through a certain area of Chicago at 2 a.m, you might be a little bit wary. And I'm sure there's a few places like that in the UK as well.
Okay.
And at those times, you have a heightened state of alertness or awareness. But actually, you should have that all the time. You should be thinking, it's dark, it's 2 a.m, I'm walking on my own. You're a target.
How much time do you spend with customers and clients on teaching them those types of skills?
It's very much dependent on what the client wants. Most of the time, they just have the physical protections and the electronics. I will talk them through some of the basics. And if they want to take it a bit further, such as learning how to evasive driving techniques or anti-surveillance, in other words, knowing when you're being followed, then they can go on a training course.
Okay.
And
do you run those? Or
we run those training courses. We use third parties to do those. We use, for the driving, one of the the most skilled driver that used to drive one of our prime ministers, who's now retired, from number 10 to checkers, backwards and forwards and wherever. Also drove a couple of American presidents. And lovely chap, very unassuming. Put him in a car and he will teach you how to drive a car. We're not talking Formula One. We're talking how to drive normal roads at speed, but safely. More importantly, to be completely aware of what's going on. And I remember we did a piece in the Times newspaper with the motoring editor, and I think it's how to drive like an SAS driver or something. That was the caption. But I think you can probably find that on the internet as a story. And we took this reporter along with us from the Times, and she was astonished at what she learned about driving in 2 hours in a car with Paul. And absolutely amazing. He was there training a client's driver for me. And she said, can we do an interview? And I asked my client if it was acceptable, and they said yes. So the Times writer sat in the back with me, our instructors in the front, and the client's driver, who was in the passenger seat being trained, and then they swapped over. But the Times driver also, lady, also got a chance to jump in and have a go at driving as well, under his tuition. I guess there's many points, and I think a couple are mentioned in the article, but one of the takeaways from Paul was about using the entire width of the road at all times, as long as you're not dangerous driving and as long as there's not a solid line down the middle. So when you're rushing down country lanes, being in the middle of the road is perfectly acceptable because it allows you to see much further and gives you a greater visual point in the distance to see what's coming towards you, and you can now take the corners much more quickly because you're taking the bend out of them, if you see what I mean. Yeah. The other thing that was very interesting is he went very slow at some points, and the reason that is done is they never want to bring the vehicle to a complete stop, because once it is at a stop, you're a sitting duck. So if you plan your route as they do on these things, and you know you've got traffic lights ahead, you start slowing right down because you try and time it to make sure that you never come to a full stop and keep the wheels rolling at all times.
Yeah, I like that.
So, no, that's an interesting part. But some clients do it, some don't. It's not a big part of the business. It's available for clients that perhaps should consider that they might want to just have their wits about them. Some people just carry on in life, happy, lucky, made a lot of money, partying all the time, completely oblivious to the risks around them. Yeah. And it's just about making them realise and think about that.
Well, when you hear a story like that, the one you mentioned in Southampton, it's a really generally gets your attention, right? It's a very scary situation for a family to have to deal with, and
yes,
being aware of these threats, and as you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, with the rates of robbery increasing.
Yes.
It's definitely something that I guess we want to try and bring some awareness to.
I think it's very difficult because the public and even people, as I said, that work in our industry, sometimes they focus on the products and the capabilities of a product.
Yeah.
The rules of security have not changed for thousands of years, and if I may, I will just simplify and just talk about that. If you were in charge of a people, and it might only be 100 people 2,000 years ago, where are you going to settle and how are you going to protect them? So often you'd find a hill somewhere, and if you didn't have a hill, you'd build a hill, and then you might get some wooden trees and put stakes in around the ground to form a wall. The early days of a castle being built. And then on the other side of the wall, they developed into digging a trench around the outside and possibly filling it with water. And then they'd make a drawbridge. And then there would be the final item that would sit in the middle of this complex, and it would be called a lookout tower. That was the first alarm system.
Yeah.
It was called a lookout tower. And on shift, there was someone up there in the lookout tower. And what the lookout tower was doing was seeing there's an army 5 days march heading towards us. Or they've seen the scouts coming. You couldn't move an army quickly. It might only be a few miles away, but they could see and they could hear the rumble of the army coming towards them. And what did they do? Because they've had a notification now that something's coming, so they would batten down the hatches, pull up the drawbridge, cut some extra arrowheads, boil some oil, get food provisions in, get all the people in, and get ready for a battle or a siege. So the whole point of security is to know that something's about to happen. And very few people have any inkling that something's about to happen to them until it happens. So you'll hear stories of people, well, we woke up and we heard this smashing, they were in our house. Some people don't wake up, they've been gassed while they're in their, asleep, so that people can rummage around, and that's a fairly popular MO in the south of Spain, not so much in the UK. But it's all too late. The analogy I'd use is it's a little bit like driving at excessive speed on the fast lane of a motorway, and you're too close to the car in front when something goes wrong, and you now have no time to manoeuvre around it. And I think of security as putting the two-car distance, or as much as possible, between the car in front. And if you can achieve that with security, you've got a fighting chance to avoid it. So most of our system designs are all about early detection, telling us information we otherwise would not have had. Often if someone targets a client, they don't just come walking in on day one. They may have been out there for weeks studying, and we call that hostile surveillance. It's what somebody does, and the word hostile is because it's with intent to do something bad, and surveillance is the gathering of intelligence. So it might be, well, they go to bed at this time, the light goes off in that room, there are 5 people in the house, this is how things tend to work, and you build up a pattern of life, and once you've got that data, you've got a fighting chance that your attack is going to succeed because you've tried to cover all bases. Now, if you had a system that was able to tell you that someone's camped out in the woods next to your garden when you're being surveyed, then it's an early warning sign to say, I've got a problem, and you can take evasive action. If you know attacks on the way towards you, and you live in a big estate and multiple targets coming towards you, you've got a chance of saying, well, I'm going to go and get into one of my safe rooms. And notice I said one of my safe rooms. We're not great believers in panic rooms these days, because when you live in a 50,000 square foot house, the panic room might take you a long time to get to. And you might be at the wrong end of the house. So we've had houses where we've built multiple safe areas inside, and they're just areas that family members can run to, slam a door, and they've got half an hour barrier between them and an attacker.
Right, okay.
Usually there'll be visuals inside, and they'll be able to hit a panic button to call for assistance. But again, that's in the high-end properties, and don't think that Croma only work in that area. Remember, we cut keys for general households all the way through to high-end billionaire clients, and everything in between. However, the principles of the hill fort, or the castle and the drawbridge, all of those principles apply to every one of us. No matter how much wealth somebody has or possession to protect, you apply those principles.
Is there one practical piece of security advice you give to the average consumer? Is there anything that you're like, actually, we should all be doing this, and you don't see people doing it enough?
I think situational awareness is one of the things that will help everybody, but it's very difficult because you can't have everybody on edge. If you go out to a restaurant, you're supposed to relax and enjoy a meal. You don't really want your back against the wall to watch.
People to be more paranoid more often.
To be more paranoid. Driving their cars is the other one, and being aware of what's behind them at all times, what's around them. And that's just good driving practice anyway. If people drove as they are trained to drive, they would be looking in their rearview mirror and their wing mirrors, and they would be aware of the vehicles around them. And I would say situational awareness. I think the most important takeaway for everybody is that I would have them issued with a panic button. Now, the reason for this is humans do not behave rationally when they're in a hostile situation. We can sit here and talk about, if an attack occurred, this is how we would respond and what we would do. Yeah. Well, in theory, that's terrific. What actually happens to the human body when it's under attack is that adrenaline kicks in, heart rate hits 200, it's almost jumping out your chest, and your blood your energy is all going on to what you consider to be the threat. This is why when you hear a commanding officer shouting ceasefire, they keep firing. It's not because they're ignoring the command, it's because they're looking at what's coming towards them and their brain is only focused on the immediate danger. And the body shuts down all other functions that are unnecessary to the purpose of defending yourself. So sometimes people freeze and you get mixed responses in hostile situations. So one thing we know is we can't ask people to do complex tasks. You can't even pick up your mobile phone and say, well, 999 or whatever the new numbers are you have to use, and then what service do you want? Well, if someone's pointing a gun at you or a knife or threatening a member of your family and telling you to open up the safe, you don't have time to do any of those things. What you can do by having a panic button, however, is train someone and actually walk them through the process of pressing the panic button. Sounds simple, yeah, but we actually train you to press a button.
So these like something you like a
radio
device
frequency, small device, and we recommend that they're carried on your car keyring.
Okay.
And the reason we put them on your car keyring is because I know most people, not everyone, but most people drive places, and when they go out of their house, they'll have their house key, their car key, and now this panic button.
Yeah.
Because I want it in their hand as they're walking from the front door to the car and from the car back to the front door or the garages. That is an attack point time when it can occur. The other times are early evening that people are robbing and coming in. You're watching telly, you've just had dinner, and of course everyone's awake and they need you awake. They're going to take you to the safe and ask you to hand over what's in it. So having radio portable panic buttons, and most people put their keys down when they go in. Some people have a home for them and put them down in a dish in the hallway. I try and encourage people to have them with them at all times so that they've got their car key, they've got their panic button, and take it upstairs to bed and put it on the bedside table, because again, if you have to get up in the middle of the night. Now, I mentioned the house key on there. Now, that's the other thing we strongly recommend. We put what's known as the CLS one-key locking system into people's homes. That means the back door, the patio door, the padlock on the shed, the front door, any door in your house works from one high security key.
Okay.
And that goes on your key ring with your car key and your panic button. So you've got everything you need. In an emergency, well, it might not be an attack, it might be a fire. You don't need to think, what key do I need to get out? That key opens anything. Whatever you are faced with, that key will open it. And I've got a car to get away in, and I've got a panic button that I can press. Now, the panic button, I say, is an important component, because what that's going to do, if it's police connected, it's going to summon assistance from a third party. And even if you don't have police connection, you can have communication to multiple members of the family, sending them a signal to say you're in distress. The difference between a panic button and a normal alarm system. How many times have you heard people say, no good having an alarm these days, the police just don't come? Well, there's an element of truth, but there's always two sides to a story. There are too many alarms and so too few police to respond to alarms that go off. And now you have to consider how many alarms in people's homes that go off are real alarms. And unfortunately, too many false alarms still occur. Now, if you are in command of a team of officers and you've got 5 alarms going off, you've got a knife attack going on in a pub somewhere, we've got a motor incident over there, well, the 5 alarms going off have suddenly not seemed too important. They're very important to the person who's being attacked, but when you're trying to manage manpower and respond. So alarm systems don't always get the fastest of responses.
Yeah.
When you press a panic button, it's a deliberately operated device by a human, and it's a distress signal. When that hits a police station, they send it out as a grade 1 response. That means whoever's nearest gets to drop what they're doing and come to you.
So on that, is it always that it goes to the police, or do people outsource some of that security as well, where you can have like...
There are multiple ways of dealing with it. You can either not have the expense of police connection and just notify using mobile phones and applications on those phones. You can notify members of the family and neighbours. You can go through to a private guard station, or you can go through to the police. Okay. My recommendation is to go through to the police and get a police response to site. Now, when you go up the food chain to certain clients, they might have a security team on site.
Yeah.
And they may even have dogs on site with those officers that are first responding and calling for backup when required. It all depends on the level of risk.
Okay, fair. Do you enjoy running a business?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, no, well, I know you said you had a lot of enthusiasm and stuff early on for the security, for the gadgets and that sort of stuff, and then you came in to run the business, and you enjoy it, the position you're in now?
Absolutely, because what we're doing is we're changing the way security works, and the mission is no longer, of course we're growing our business, but the mission is now about making a difference. What are we trying to do? And we're trying to educate people in the world of security to get them to understand some of the parts that we've touched on today. I mean, there's a huge amount of depth to what we've just talked about to go into in detail. But it's getting people to buy security that's absolutely fit for purpose and has a chance of protecting them. If people weren't given panic buttons and they just bought an alarm system, well, that's going to hopefully guard their house while they're out. It's not going to help them if they get robbed and someone says turn it off. Because you've got a choice. Do you want to turn it off or don't you?
Yeah.
Same with opening the safe. So we're educating people in the ways that crime is now occurring, and it allows us to then look at their property and say, these are things you can do. Now, I can't guarantee if you're doing 90 miles an hour in the fast lane, even if you are keeping distance, that if there is a jackknife lorry in front of you, that you're going to avoid it in its entirety. But if you're far enough back, we might limit the damage that the impact.
Well, it might save your life.
And it might save your life.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies to security. And it's getting people to see it in that perspective. But it's a subject matter that not many want to address, because who wants to face the reality of, well, I might get attacked, might get mugged, might get robbed.
Yeah,
it's not the thought. It's not something you really want to contemplate. And sometimes we just tick the box, as corporations do, to say, oh yes, we've got a head of security, yes, we've put an alarm in, we've put some cameras in, but what is their purpose and what are they actually doing to truly protect the people in the business and the assets of the business or the home?
Where do you spend most of your time now within the business? Do you have a big focus on sales or
consultancy? And not really sales. We don't actively sell our business. We get a lot of introductions, and clients just come to us to say, we've got a problem.
Yeah. We
hear you know how to fix it.
Referrals.
Can you fix it? And most of my time is I deal with a lot of the high-end stuff that requires some consultation with the client to understand what the risks are. We also work in areas such as the hospitals, Poole, Bournemouth, Southampton. We do the security in those establishments, everyday stuff. So I said earlier, we do everything from keys all the way through to high-end security.
Yeah.
So I tend to stick with all the high-end stuff. Uh-huh. The rest of the teams are doing all the everyday and the stuff in the middle, I guess you could say. But they all have this same principle, and my other main role is educating the teams of staff to follow the vision of educating our customers, no matter how small the security system is, follow the protocols that I've set out of understanding what the risk is, and then using the right proportions of locks and alarms and CCTV to the right level of ingredients to give you the solution that really will make a difference to that client.
You mentioned, if I stick with the high-end stuff for a little bit, obviously you mentioned the business that you did a reverse takeover of. There was a Duke. 2012,
yes.
Was a Duke involved in that?
The Duke of Northumberland, his brother was a director of, or is a director of it was a director of Croma Vigilant, which was the guarding company that was the AIM-listed business.
Okay.
And James approached us and said, did we want to join forces? We did all that back in 2012, March 2012. I spent at least 3-4 years just getting used to the world of AIM listing, which is another world.
Does anyone listen to this? Anyone can go on and buy shares now in?
Yes, they can. Anyone can go and buy shares. The problem is there's only a few shares in issue. There's about 14.9 million, and they're very closely held shares with the directors and myself. There's a few institutional investors. But I imagine as we go on or embark on this acquisition strategy, we'll be issuing more shares and raising more cash to build this idea that I have of having security centres around the country. And it will help us service national clients. So Odeon Cinemas, Everyman Cinemas, that we look after. It's not easy when you're on the south coast, and of course we've got sites in Scotland, we've got sites all over the country, to get engineers, and we work on a number of them, but we have to share that service with another competitor because we can't effectively cover all areas. We've just opened in Manchester in November. I'm hoping to open between Manchester and Southampton in the next couple of months, another security centre in the Midlands, and we're just going to keep
opening them.
Keep going with those ideas.
And the acquisitions, are they just anything, you're looking at anything within the whole security space?
We're mainly looking, well, actually it is again broad spectrum. We're not looking at guarding. That's not a good business to acquire. We're looking at security companies that do fire, CCTV access control and alarms the same as us, and locksmith businesses that do specialist lock work. So one of the utilities companies, I didn't realise, we've worked with them for years, but we had a 2-year contract that came to an end just as COVID started, and we'd been working for them 2 years. We'd had a team of engineers going around their sites, fixing electronic locking systems for them, and I had no idea how vast this utilities organisation was until I realised we needed 5-6 men for 2 years solidly to do the work, to roll out what they needed. And that was in response to a threat of contamination to the utility, which was water, and the need to raise the level of security in those environments.
What gets you ticking?
When we solve a problem, that's the one when we are presented a problem that's difficult, and I can't talk about a particular problem that's been presented to us at the moment, but it is overseas, and it will be if we will only be able to consult. It's too big a project for us to deal. Somebody's building a city, basically. And we've been asked to look at, consult.
What a cool project to be consulted
all of the
on.
things, how we're going to lay out the security and the design of this to mitigate and reduce risks to what will then be the residents of that location. So what gets me going is A, being asked to do those things, and B, seeing challenges that even my own team say there is no solution. There's always a solution. We just need to turn it on its head and look at it from a different perspective. There's always an answer in the world of security. But if you go down a single track, you can't deviate. You've got to sit back from it and look at it holistically, and then you can design a solution.
Do you think that mindset comes a little bit from, like back in the day, you were like picking locks in in safes and stuff like that, like solving puzzles? And
I think you have to be a little bit on the spectrum, if that's what you mean, Josh.
I wouldn't say that.
So you have to have a bee in your bonnet is the English expression you'd use.
Yeah.
If I start something, I have to finish it. So if it was picking a lock, you weren't going to get beaten by it, even if you wasted a lot of time. And the same with me pulling an electronic gadget apart. I'd want to fix it. There's no point just pulling it apart for the sake of it. You'd have to spend hours on it. So, there is a bit of commitment, determination, and a drive to see things through.
Where do you think that comes from?
I don't know. I think it's just we all have different personality traits. I'm stubborn, perhaps, and I guess I'm driven, and I will go to extreme lengths to make something happen. And when I'm being paid or employed by a client to do something, it's my responsibility to do my best. And I think that's a saying that a famous politician once came up about a man doing his best, because beyond that there is no more. And I'm a great believer in that philosophy. If you ask me to do my best, it must be my best. If I'm doing training exercise-wise, I've got to push that extra just because I have to. Then I know I can't do any more.
Yeah, no, that fulfillment and that pride in oneself.
Yes.
No, I like it. In your career today, is there anybody that you look back on and be like, they had a real impact on you, a real influence on you?
In my career,
or even your life?
Probably not. In my life, I guess an influence, rightly or wrongly, because quite a controversial character, was Winston Churchill. Obviously, he died in 1965, 2 years after I was born. So never knew him or met him. But of course, my English grandfather did, because he flew him to North Africa, which on a number of occasions, and had some very interesting stories, as you can imagine. and he was fascinated by Churchill, and he had a number of publications about him, and of course he worked with him personally on a number of occasions. I have at home on my desk in my office in my house a picture of Winston Churchill, which was sent to my grandfather, and in the back of the picture is a letter typed and signed by Churchill, thanking my grandfather for an event that took place on a trip down to North Africa. And I think we can talk about it now because they're all dead and it's time spent. But Churchill got on what was then called Silver City Airline, and it was a rush. We're going down to North Africa, and they cleaned the plane. And in those days, they had little metal dishes in the armrests of the to put your cigarettes out in. Well, of course, he had his cigars going, and he was sat in this thing. They'd cleaned the plane, off they went. Someone had not replaced the dish on this particular arm, and in those days, aeroplanes perhaps weren't built with such fire retardant material as they should have been. Right. Of course, he's got his cigar sitting in this armrest, and it wasn't just, I mean, obviously there was smoke everywhere because he was on the cigar, so nobody batted an eyelid, and it wasn't till flames were visible that my grandfather left the captain's seat with an extinguisher to put this fire out on the plane, and then they had to emergency land. As soon as they were on the ground, Churchill's aides said to my grandfather and his co-pilot, this was a non-event, it didn't happen. This was a history-changing event. It's never to be mentioned again. They all survived, everyone was fine. And I didn't learn of this story until my grandfather was 95 when he told me, and then he had a bit of a panic, and I said, relax. I said, they can't put you in prison now. No. And they're all dead. So
well, it feels like I've just got an exclusive.
in terms of that,
in terms of the story, yeah.
In terms of that story,
what a story!
It's amazing.
And what a lovely
and then the letter to say thank you.
Yeah, right. To have that on your desk. What history!
But typical British stiff upper lip. The letter makes no reference to the incident. It just says, "I want to thank you." Personally, fascinating. But it's wonderful to have that piece of history. Yeah. With that photograph. He did also get sent a cigar, but I only remember that from when I was a boy. It finally crumbled away when I was a kid. My grandfather kept, all that time.
Do you like sports, or how do you relax outside of work? I know
I play tennis. I love tennis. Tennis is my go-to sport. I try and do that twice a week. Sometimes I'll do 2 to 3 hour sessions, and I do play that at I say extreme. I wouldn't say I'm good. I'd say I play it to the maximum. So it'll be me against 2 on the other side.
Really?
And it's just non-stop. So I'll get my heart rate right up for 2 hours, and then I'll spend the rest of the weekend recovering.
And you got a young family?
No, I don't have a young family. I have a 27, a 25, and a 23-year-old boys. Okay. And then I have a daughter who is nearly 16. So, yes, they're all grown up.
Do you think any of them will come into the business at some point?
2 of the boys are in the business. Alessandro is a technical engineer and runs technical support in the office. And Bertie's involved in marketing and other bits and pieces in the business and operations. Nice. Gianmarco, my eldest, was in the business, but he went off to work on super yachts. Okay. And continues to be involved in that world along with his girlfriend she's from South Africa. And it's that's another fascinating world because they're interesting characters as well by virtue of their what they do. He's in the UK at the moment, but he's heading out to, I think, either Marbella or Palma, and now he's qualified as a financial advisor. He's going for a purser's job on a super yacht because he doesn't need to be doing the hard work anymore. And they do 6 months on and 6 months off, which is interesting. They do 2 on, 2 off, 2 on. So they only end up working for 6 months of the year, which gives them time to do another thing. So my son has a couple of other little businesses. One of them is called Vessel Sim, and he does SIM cards for people that work on super yachts. Okay. Because the SIM card's been set up by arrangement to work in all the ports that they go to, so they don't have to keep swapping SIMs in whichever country they turn up in. So they pay a monthly fee and they get free data and whatever else it is. So he's going to
Sounds
be running
very
that.
Entrepreneurial.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
He's got to get on and do it now. Yeah. He's got to go on and do it now.
What a life. What a life. That sounds great. In terms of What was I going to say next? In terms of motivation, where would you say you take most of your motivation from? Your drive? Is it the need to succeed, or is it winning?
I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that I don't need to compete with someone else because I compete with myself. So if my performance on the rowing machine is X, the next time I do it, I need to be better. And each time I need to be better. I don't really compare it. And the same with tennis. As long as I've done my best, and I talked about that earlier,
yeah, you did.
It's all about doing the maximum. If you know you've really done the maximum, that's all you can do.
You're living up to your full potential.
So it's about 100%, not 80%, on everything. So whether it's me playing tennis, whether it's me getting on a rowing machine, and yeah, I do push it a bit too far. There's no two ways about that, but that's when you find where your limit is, I guess.
Agreed. Love it. I love it. I mean, as long as you don't kill yourself doing it. As long as you don't kill yourself doing it.
Well, I've survived this long.
Yeah, no.
Hopefully we'll carry on.
Great. Business lessons. Okay. So we've got an entrepreneurial audience. You're running a very big business, over 1,000 people. What would be your main business? If I was to ask you to distill 3 business tips for business owners and entrepreneurs, what would be your top 3?
I don't know if it's for the business owners. One of the things that I'm passionate about is whenever there is an issue, by talking openly, honestly and directly to a client, and I try and teach all of the staff this, you can't go wrong. If I've got to tell you some bad news, I've got to tell you some bad news. The best thing to do is not to wrap it up, is just to deliver it and say, but this is what's wrong, but have a plan of what you're going to do to fix it. And we don't live in a perfect world. We'll start digging up somebody's garden and then run into something. We'll have an engineer putting a drill in a wall and hit a water pipe. Things go wrong. Best thing you can do is to teach people to be able to have open conversation instead of running off and hiding it and sweeping it under the carpet. So I find that people are more responsive to that level of integrity, and my father and grandfather taught me that as a child. You've just got to be honest and open with everyone and tell them exactly as it is. I have conversations, and I always remember a billionaire, me sending a quote in, and I sent them our cost of materials. It was a big multi-page Excel spreadsheet for all the parts. The margin that we were making, the number of hours we needed, and they were flabbergasted. They said, well, you can't be making this much money. Well, it wasn't that much. And I said, well, we are experts, and that's what you're paying for. But they couldn't turn around afterwards and say, we were charged too much, because we've told them exactly what it is.
Full transparency, yeah.
And I think sometimes if someone asks the question, I don't have a problem answering it. It may not be what they want to hear, but if you've asked the question, give them the answer. Whenever there is something that's going wrong, and we had an example recently on a project, we've priced to go and do a job, we turn up and it's a can of worms. And everyone's in panic saying, well, how do we deal with this? Because we've now got to spend thousands of pounds to fix it. Well, pick the phone up and phone the client and say, this is what's happened. What do you think they're going to say? Show them, demonstrate it, and you'll be surprised at how responsive people can be. Sometimes you'll get somebody telling you, that's your problem, you fix it. But most people are reasonable, and they say, well, hang on a minute, they're right, this is what they've allowed for. They've lifted the lid on this, and there is this mess that was unknown to anyone. I think that happens with construction work a lot, but it happens in business, any business. And when things like that happen, the best thing you can do is tell the people that matter and communicate it to them, and you'll be surprised at the positive responses that people give back. So that's probably not just for business owners, it's for everyone.
Life.
It's for everyone in the business to behave in that manner. That's one.
Yeah, I like it though. That's cracking.
So what else would we say? I think engaging with people, which we've lost the art of in the last 2 years because of lockdown, actually going and meeting people. I love meeting people, and I can't. We have to all do Zoom calls these days. there's nothing better than actually having that communication, because the communication you and I are having today is with hands, it's with voice, it's with facial expression and eyes.
Yeah. I also think there's a real thing,
and you can
like
feel
energy, right?
And you feel it.
Yeah, yeah. You can't
feel that on a Zoom call.
You can't recreate that, no. And I think there's certain levels of stuff that we just don't understand yet from a scientific perspective, right?
I agree.
So I always think like a radio, right? You can tune into a radio, and you know that you can listen to the radio because the waves are there, right? But like us understanding how humans communicate.
There are so many different signs in movement, body language. There are so many things that are so important to conveying a message. And I think I would encourage people, if there's a lesson, if it's important, go and see somebody.
Yeah. I mean, you're a real demonstration of that. I mean, you were in the dentist this morning, you thought this is a really important podcast to come on, and you made the effort to be here. So, yeah.
Again, it's about commitment, timings, not letting people down. I hate being late, but I was this morning. I thought they were going to be done in an hour, and it took them 2 hours to sort this root canal out. And you patiently waited for me, so thank you. But no, I am a stickler for that, and if you have a commitment, it's staying with your commitment. You see it through. I don't know whether... I don't know how you instill that in today's world, because we live in a very different world. When I was growing up, Roman Catholic, Sunday school, Catholic church on Sundays. Even when I went away to boarding school, there were maybe 6 or 7 of us put in a minibus every Sunday and sent off to Shaftesbury to go to the Catholic church, while the rest went to the normal school church. Having that sense of duty to do something, that's your commitment. You've got to do it. Once you're 18, you can grow up and decide whether you want to believe in God or not, and whether you want to go to church every Sunday. That's each person's choice. But as a child, your parents' responsibility was to put you through, and that's what you did. So anyway, face to face is the other one I think is really, really important. And I guess we've covered the third one, which is to be reliable, because you will be remembered for the last action and not the 10 good ones before. And if your last action was a bad one, that, I'm afraid, is what you're going to be remembered for. So doing your best again and all of those things, so that your last action is always a positive one. Because if it is negative, that is what people remember of you.
Before I get into my very last question, I'd like to ask, are you optimistic about the future? Where humanity finds itself today, obviously there's a lot of, from a security perspective in, Ukraine.
I don't think we're going to see... Security is going to continue taking control of people's lives, whether I like it or they like it. We will see lockdown on airports, border controls, and it's not going to get any easier. But you asked the question, am I optimistic about the future? It's very, very difficult, because if we want to read the science and study the science, we've got pollution on this planet at devastating levels at the moment. We've got a population of people on the planet that is unsustainable. We are using more resource every year to look after the people than the planet can output. So it's a bit like having £10,000 in your bank and you're spending 12 every month.
Yeah.
It's going to run out. So I guess I'll tell you why I might be optimistic about it, because I'm a believer that we will find a solution to it. Technology, solar power, the changes, the development that's going on in those areas, maybe we will populate another planet. Maybe we will be able to siphon off the overload and push it somewhere else. Because if we don't, then there's little to be optimistic about. But I believe in technology, and I believe that something, will change and something will be done. China, which is the most polluted country on the planet, the Prime Minister is saying that President is saying he wants to be carbon neutral and is aiming for it. They're building almost country-size solar panel farms in their country to provide electricity. There's a company developing a new solar panel that is in a film form that you can just about stick it on anything, and it's 10 times more efficient. So there will be a time when the roof of your car will have a film on it, and it will power your car. You won't need to go and plug it in and charge it. So we're charging them at the moment because that's what we've got to do. But I don't think we'll be doing that in the future. So I'm optimistic about how clever and resourceful human beings can be, and that they can find solutions to these problems. But we have real-world problems right now, forgetting the Ukraine-Russia, which is bad enough. There are a number of problems with the change in weather, and we have to come up as a planet with solutions for these things. I'm optimistic that science will do that.
Okay, nice one. That was a good answer. I enjoyed that. I was going to say that was my last question before my last question, but I've got another one for you before I get on to that one. Is there any particular like habits that you have that you do regularly? As an example, that you're like, okay, I wake up this time in the morning, or I'm an avid reader, or I know you mentioned about you play tennis a couple of times a week and you put yourself to your max. I think it's there's
training, exercise, work. There's nothing specifically that I can tell you. I listen to TED every now and then.
Okay. Got a particular favourite talk that you like on TED?
No, I just listen to them randomly, and every now and then I think that's an interesting perspective. I don't take any of their talks in too seriously because it's a perspective at that point in time. But it allows us to be a bit more free thinking, to see things from other angles, and I think that's helpful.
Keeps you open-minded.
Yeah, and I think we talked before we started this interview about travel, and that's the other thing that I think broadens everyone's horizon, is travelling, understanding different cultures and languages. And I'm in my element when I'm travelling, so I will learn other languages, I will speak other languages on purpose because I want to learn. I will speak French in France, I'll speak Spanish in Spain and Italian in Italy, and have learnt enough phrases in other languages, Portuguese as well, sorry I forgot Portuguese, and learning phrases in other languages when I'm there because I'm interested. So whether it's in an Arab country or Farsi, which is a Persian language, which I know a lot of Persian clients, and I find it fascinating learning their culture and their languages.
Nice. I love that. Really do love that. Maybe we're starting off with some Persian or Spanish, Portuguese. I guess before again, I'm getting greedy now. But if you had 3 holiday destinations or 3 destinations you've been on the world that you'd be like, guys, if you haven't been here, you need to go to these places.
My top one probably is the Rio Negro and the Amazon River. The Rio Negro is the other river that joins the Amazon, but it's not necessarily a destination that's easy for everyone to get to. I went there before I had children and responsibilities because where I went was quite dangerous. We were 6 weeks up into the middle of nowhere, no communications, 1990 this was. But what an amazing experience and adventure to go to a place like that. So I wouldn't call it a favourite destination for food and wine. I'd call it a favourite destination just Brazil, such a vast country. And then south of the Amazon, you've got the Pantanal, which is the size of France, and it's a swampland. That was absolutely incredible going into that place. If we're talking holiday destinations, definitely the Maldives for diving and just complete relaxing place. And my third and equal favourite, of course, is Italy, my home country, Sicily especially. But I love Tuscany, or the Tuscan coast. So there's a number of towns and villages along that coastline that are amazing. And of course, I guess the luxury resort, Forte dei Marmi, is the Saint-Tropez of Italy. Where all the glitz goes. Well, just behind there is a little Pietrasanta, which is a village, which is the home of Michelangelo, and the museum is up there. There's lots of fascinating parts to go and visit. So I guess we've got Brazil, we've got the Maldives, and we've got Italy. So those are my 3.
I love it. That's definitely
They're completely different.
Yeah, they are. They're amazing. That sounds great. Okay, last question. You get a dinner party, 3 guests, dead or alive, who'd you pick?
Definitely Churchill, because I'd be fascinated. My mother, because I was so young when she died. There's always so much unsaid that is to be said. So that's number 2. Who would be my third dinner guest? I would probably bring in. I'd probably bring in a musician or an actor. If I was bringing an actor in, I know which one I would bring in. A Silence of the Lambs. What's his name?
Anthony Hopkins?
Sir Anthony Hopkins now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd bring him in. I find him fascinating. He adapts to... He's got a similar style in all his films, but he's got an education about him that I like. So, yeah, that would be quite a mix, wouldn't it, again?
Yeah, it would be fantastic.
3 completely, a complete mix.
I love it. I guess I just want to say a massive thank you. I really appreciate you coming down and giving me your time today. It's been really fascinating to learn a little bit more about you. You know, you're clearly a super suave, intelligent, interesting guy. And I just thanks for taking the time to come down here today. It was really interesting.
Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate the opportunity. I've never seen my world of security as suave and sophisticated, but I'll take it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.